Hello there, I'm a day late reviewing 1956's Forbidden Planet. To me, Forbidden Planet is one of the great sci-fi classics out there, if not the great sci-fi classic. Now there are many great classics, Star Wars, Star Trek, Alien, The Terminator, Predator, but they all came out after I was born. I was there to see them first run in the theater, so I don't think of them as classics. To me, they are contemporary. Forbidden Planet, on the other hand, that is something that I've only seen on TV well after its initial theatrical run, hence the classic title. And yet, to this day, it is one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time. Not too shabby considering that here in 2024, the movie is 68 years old. Now I will warn you, this is a 1950s movie, so the story is going to play out at a slower pace. The action's not highly choreographed chopsocky, and the special effects aren't computer generated. And my biggest warning, this is the first movie with a musical score that is performed using electronic instruments. That in itself isn't bad, as I like electronic stuff, and in the case of the movie, it is used well to give an atmospheric, otherworldly feel. But in the first few minutes of the film, they crank the volume up and it's rather annoying. Once we get past the opening 5 minutes, it's all good. So strap yourselves in as we're heading to the Forbidden Planet. This is the United Planets cruiser C-57D, en route to the planet Altair 4 to see how a colonial expedition is doing after 20 years. As the cruiser enters orbit, their science officer announced that their ship is being scanned by radar. Shortly thereafter, they receive a radio signal from one of the members of the colonial expedition, named Morbius. Morbius states that he is fine and he warns the ship off, saying that if they land he can't guarantee their safety. Commander Adams says that their orders are to land and survey the situation, and he intends to do just that. Morbius gives the landing coordinates and the ship proceeds to land. Once they touch down, they are met by a robot called Robbie, who takes them to Morbius's residence. Once again, Morbius states that he's doing just fine and is in no need of their assistance. Commander Adams apologizes for the inconvenience, but they are under orders to follow up on the well-being of the crew of the colonial expedition. Morbius invites them in for lunch, and we pick up their conversation after lunch. And here begins some major errors by Morbius. As he makes it obvious, he enjoys the solitude and wants to be left alone. So he goes about trying to show that he doesn't need their help, that he has this amazing robot that is such a good help. The crew of the C-57D haven't seen anything like Robbie before and are amazed. One of the more handy functions of Robbie is that for all intents and purposes, he works like a replicator from Star Trek. For those unfamiliar, a replicator rearranges matter to a new form and in the case of Star Trek, makes food. Robbie makes food as well, but he can make non-food substances also. The crew are amazed at Robbie, and Morbius tries to downplay the robot's abilities by showing them that the house is secure, as if every household has steel shutters that just appear out of nowhere. Having shown them that he is in no danger, Morbius encourages them to be on their way. Commander Adams says that's the plan once they have talked to the other survivors, and this is where we learn why Morbius tried to warn them off from landing. All the others are dead, killed by some mysterious force on the planet. Commander Adams is somewhat dubious of the whole affair when even worse news happens for Morbius.
Father.
Great. Here Morbius is trying to get rid of a spaceship full of healthy men in their 20s who haven't seen any females in a year, and his 21-year-old daughter, Altair, shows up in a miniskirt. Not only that, she's quite forward.
That's very kind of you.
You're lovely, Doctor. Of course, the two end ones are unbelievable.
Commander Adams expresses some concern over Altair being lonely on the planet with just her dad, because of course he would, and she's like, it's all good. Morbius then tries to rush them out the door, but the commander says that he's now going to have to get instructions from Earth since they were unaware of the death of most of the crew of the colonial expedition. Morbius says that anything they need to speed them on their way, please let him know and he'll see what he can do, and the crew returns to their ship. We catch up later with the crew disassembling the ship to build a communications dish powerful enough to contact Earth, and Morbius sent Robbie over with some shielding so that the crew doesn't have to completely tear their ship apart. Once again, defying her father's instructions, Altair has come out to oogle the men and wanders off with First Officer Jerry. Jerry is taking advantage of Alterra's naivete when Commander Adams shows up. The commander sends Jerry packing and chews Alterra out for dressing like a floozy.
Bogus!
Later that night, something unseen sneaks aboard the spaceship and damages the radio equipment. Fortunately for them, the equipment can be repaired. Commander Adams and Doc Ostro return to Morbius's home only to find out he is in his office and not to be disturbed. While Doc watches the door, Commander Adams goes outside to visit with Alterra. Having been rebuked by Adams yesterday, Alterra is out to win his approval and asks him to help her with her study of biology. The commander is all too happy to oblige. After a bit of that, Adams returns to see if Morbius has shown his face, and Doc says that he is still in his office. Adams is tired of waiting and goes in. Morbius is nowhere to be seen. They find some papers on Morbius's desk, but they are written in a language that they haven't seen before. A hidden doorway opens behind them, and Morbius is not happy to see them there. Adams explains that they are here because the communication equipment was sabotaged last night. Rather than simply denying having done the sabotage, Morbius, who wants nothing more than to be left alone, explains that he couldn't have done it because he was studying the remains of a super-advanced civilization.
What?
He then shows them some of what he has discovered in his 20 years on the planet. To some extent, this is understandable. People like to share and talk about things that they are interested in. As we will come to see, Morbius is fascinated by the long-dead race that once populated this world, a race he calls the Krell. They developed technology far beyond anything known to man and then disappeared almost overnight. One of the things he shows them is an education device. Morbius says that using it almost killed him, and in fact killed the captain of his expedition. It was thanks to the educator that his intellect doubled, and gave him the ability to build Robbie, and slowly over the years, he has been studying and coming to understand some of the Krell technology. After showing the Doctor and Commander a number of Krell marvels, they return to Morbius's office, and now begins the argument. Commander Adams thinks the scientific value of the remaining Krell machines is too big for just a single man, and that it needs to be under supervision by the government. For the greater good, no doubt. Morbius says that he has been expecting that claim, which sort of begs the question, why did he show them all the things if he knew that they were going to try to push him out? He explains that only he is smart enough to barely understand the technology, and he will give out bits and pieces of information to the government when he deems it okay to do so. This doesn't sit well with the Doctor or Commander, but before they can come to some sort of accommodation, the Commander receives a call from their ship. The communications chief has been killed. His body was torn apart. Morbius stands in shocked silence. After the Commander and Doc leave, Morbius says to Alterra,
Let's start it again.
Sometime later at the C-57D, we see the Commander and Doc talking over a plastic cast of a footprint they found outside. It's huge, and the Doc says that it's made up of several disparate elements that don't occur together naturally, that it's some sort of nightmare creature. The first officer then brings over the cook for disciplinary action. Apparently the cook got drunk last night around the time of the murder. As it happens, he was in the company of Robbie the robot, giving the robot an alibi. And they know it wasn't Morbius because he was with them at the time of the murder. The next morning they have a funeral for the chief, and Morbius and Alterra come by. After the eulogy, Morbius comes over to the Commander and Doctor and gives his "I warned you" speech. Morbius then says that it would be best for them to get out of Dodge, and hopefully there will be no more deaths. He and Alterra then leave, and the crew sets up a defensive perimeter for the night. That night their assailant comes back. It's invisible, but appears on radar and in the electric display of their disintegrator fence. They bring all arms to bear against the creature, but it withstands everything they throw at it, and it kills 3 more crewmen before disappearing. We then cut to the Krell lab where we find Morbius asleep and a number of power gauges behind him lit up. We hear a female scream, and he awakens and rushes back to his house to check on Alterra. She had a nightmare. She says that in her dream something was trying to kill the men of the C-57D. Morbius reassures her that it was just a dream, but he says there's nothing he can do to help them while they remain on the planet. Back at the C-57D, the Commander and Doc are having a conversation about the thing that attacked them. It should be impossible for anything to withstand their disintegrator beams. The commander decides that they need to forcibly evacuate Morbius and Alterra from the planet, but before they do it, one of them is going to use the educator device to boost their IQ. I have to admit, this seems like an unnecessary risk to me. They don't need a brain boost to grab the civilians and flee the planet, but as we will see, there is a reason for it. The Doc agrees and they head back to the Morbius estate. Once there, the commander talks to Alterra while the Doc sneaks off to the Krell lab. Adams tells Alterra that he was going to take her and her father away, and she says that Morbius won't leave and she can't bring herself to leave him behind. Adams warns that there's an invisible monster loose on the planet and it isn't safe. She says she is immune. Adams then asks the Doc to chime in and discovers that the Doc is nowhere to be found. They go into Morbius's office and see Robbie carrying Doc down the hall towards them. Doc has used the machine and he is dying. So Morbius had told the truth about the machine, that it was dangerous and potentially fatal. Doc informs them that Morbius was wrong. The Krell had finished their great work, a machine with no instrumentalities. If they could think it, the machine would make it. But the Krell had forgotten something, or perhaps thought they had evolved beyond it. Monsters from the id. And that is the reason that one of the crew of the C-57D had to use the machine, to learn the answer to our mystery. Doc then dies.
Bogus.
Morbius arrives and sees the doctor. He sneers that he had been warned and has now paid the price for his greed. Alterra is shocked to see her father in this light, his coldness and lack of compassion. She decides that she wants to leave with the commander. She leaves to pack and the commander asks Morbius, what is the id? Morbius tells him that it's an old psychological term used to describe the subconscious mind. The commander then puts all the pieces together. There's a giant machine out there with enough power to make anything that a person can think of. At least, so long as their mind is sufficiently advanced enough to register on the machine's sensors. The machine also picks up the unconscious thoughts too, the petty hates and jealousies, their lust for destruction. Morbius is stunned. He pities the Krell, saying that they couldn't understand what was going on, that they had thought themselves evolved past such things. He then realizes, wait a minute, that can't be right. There's a monster loose on the planet now, and there are no Krell left. And the commander replies that there's only one person alive on the planet who has had their brain boosted. Morbius is in denial. Robbie then warns that there's something moving towards the house. Morbius expresses his condolences towards the commander. The commander says to save it for Alterra, who has admitted her love to him. Morbius is horrified and begs her to renounce her feelings for the commander. She says she won't. The creature arrives and makes its way past the steel shutters. They all rush to the Krell lab. The commander confronts Morbius. He says that Morbius must have subconsciously called the monster into being when the rest of the crew of the colony ship had voted return home. And now that he and his crew are here interfering with Morbius's research, it's back. Morbius is in shock and begs Alterra to say that it isn't so, that he isn't capable of any of this. She can't bring herself to do it. Morbius then comes to the realization that he must be guilty. He stands before the door that the creature is trying to get through and renounces it, having a psychotic breakdown. Morbius collapses, and then the power gauges dim. Morbius then has the commander initiate a self-destruct sequence for the Krell engine. He tells them that they need to be 100 million miles away in 24 hours, or they will be destroyed in the ensuing explosion. 24 hours later, they are all aboard the C-57D when they watch on their monitor.
1.
The commander then tells Alterra that 1,000,000 years from now, the name of Morbius will be remembered. A shining beacon that is a reminder that men are not God. The end. And there you have it, Forbidden Planet. A cautionary tale about the hubris of man. And there are examples aplenty in the movie, such as Commander Adams' insistence on landing on Altair 4 after receiving Morbius' admittedly weak warning. Morbius believing that his daughter would not try to meet the crew of the arriving ship. Or that once having seen that they're young, healthy men, that she wouldn't try to spend more time with them. Commander Adams' insistence on staying on the planet after some of their equipment was damaged and no one saw the intruder. Morbius believing that showing the commander and the doctor the Krell wonders was a good idea. Anyone believing that building a machine that can create whatever you think is a good idea. I know that I have trouble focusing on a single thought for long, without something random popping in. Can you imagine you hear a noise and you ask yourself, Was that a dog, a cat, maybe the cry of a child? Next thing you know, there's a dog, a cat, and a child standing before you thanks to this machine. It'd be total chaos. And that's just with your conscious mind. That doesn't bring into account the ethical considerations. Let's say you create the dog, a cat, and a child. Are they real? Do they have rights? You didn't really want these things and you wish them out of existence. Is that murder? Creation without effort or intent seems like a really bad idea to me. Then there was the Doctor and Commander Adams thinking that it would be a good idea to use the brain booster. It was a bit deus ex machina so that we could get our answer, as we don't see how Doc comes to the conclusions that he does. How does he know that the machine can read minds and make whatever the individual thinks? Sure, Morbius told him that it was what the Krell were trying to achieve, but how does he really know that they actually succeeded? Did he create something? And my big question is, if the machine is working and Morbius's mind is powerful enough to register on it, then why isn't it making whatever he thinks of consciously? Why didn't the machine stop the C-57D in orbit when Morbius warned them off? Some sort of invisible wall or an energy pulse to push the ship away. I can't explain it. One change to the story I would suggest would play to the bestial nature of the id. Have the creature killed First Officer Jerry Farman first, as he was putting the moves on Alterra, and fathers can be quite protective of their daughters. Just damaging the transmitter they were trying to build is far too logical and peaceful an act for a rage monster. Still, I really like this movie. It has a number of interesting ideas and stands out as one of the best-made sci-fi movies from the 1950s. As you watch the movie, you can clearly see that they put time and money into it, as the production value is excellent. From costumes to sets to special effects, this film looks outstanding for when it was made. Quite frankly, I think it still looks good. Here's a clip from another sci-fi movie of the same year. The electronic score is interesting. It gets strange and otherworldly right, but it doesn't really work for the more mundane aspects of the film, such as the budding romance between the Commander and Alterra. And it could have used something exciting during the big monster attack towards the end. The movie was directed by Fred M. Wilcox. He's best known for Lassie Come Home, The Secret Garden, Shadow in the Sky, and Forbidden Planet. He does a fine job, although it might tax the patient of the ADD crowd. The movie was written by Cyril Hume, based on a story by Irving Bloch and Alan Adler. Hume is known for Tarzan the Ape Man, Affairs of a Gentleman, Ransom, and Forbidden Planet. Bloch is known for Forbidden Planet, Kronos, War of the Satellites, and The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock. Adler is known for Forbidden Planet. It starred Leslie Nielsen, Anne Francis, Walter Pidgeon, and Warren Stevens. They all do a fine job, but only Pidgeon is really called on to show any range. It was rated G, so it is family-friendly. Any graphic violence occurs off-screen. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 38 minutes, so it shouldn't tax your patience. It had a budget of just under $2 million, a pretty good sum back in the day. It made $3 million. Assuming that Hollywood accounting worked back then as it does today, that means it lost money, which surprised me since the movie is so well regarded. IMDb has it at 7.5 out of 10, Metacritic has it at 80 out of 100, and Rotten Tomatoes has it at 92% per critics and 85% per audience. I think the IMDb might be a little low, but otherwise I think those scores are fair. I myself would give it an 8.5 out of 10. Even though I have talked some smack about it, this is an excellent film. Plus, imperfect as the movie is, it still contains a very important message, even today. Heck, especially today. Beware the hubris of man. Why is this important? I'll leave you with these 3 words. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time.
It's one small step for man.
Now cut that!